Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. Today, we are waiting for Howard, our presenter, who is going to be talking about the Battle of Carrhae, the battle between Parthians and one of the members, Triumvirate. His name is Crassus. So what I basically, I just wanted to portray Crassus. Obviously was a extremely ruthless, but at the same time, he was an equal opportunity ruthless person. So without further ado, I'll let Howard share and start a presentation. I'm going to start the recording.
Okay, where's the sharing thing here? Yeah, just little comment. The Romans had a history of there was a famous instance where a Roman commander executed his son in a battle. His son was actually too aggressive, so he was executed for not following orders.
Tiberius, yeah. All right. Again, today, presentation is Battle of Carrhae. They pronounced in English. So between Parthians and Rome, particularly Crassus, and you'll get to the point where it's not just Rome, it's particular, one of the Triumvirate members, there's the Triumvirate, and how we'll get into that, obviously.
We'll get into that.
All right, good.
What we're looking at is here's my title screen. Basically, we're looking at ancient Rome, we're looking at Crassus, and we're looking at Rome was not in good shape at the time, but let's go to the presentation. Parthian Empire. What we're looking at here is this map shows the Parthian. I pulled this off of Wikipedia. This is the Parthian Empire in about 200 BC. The Parthians themselves were described as originally a nomadic tribe known as the Parni, and they seem to have migrated into the Seleucid Empire, which is a big empire at this point in time. They were a province of the empire, and what seems to have happened is the Seleucids, of course, were descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals. And what's happened here is that Parthian Hyrcania. Hyrcania is not labeled here, but it's the bottom of the Caspian Sea there, basically. Parthia and Hyrcania were provinces or satraps of the Seleucid Empire, and at some point their ruler, a guy named Andragoras, revolted against the Seleucid kings and established himself as a kingdom. At this point, the Parthians invaded him, and he was on his own, and they conquered and killed him. This apparently took place sometime around 238 BCE. The first Parthian king is a guy named Arsaces or Arsaces, and the Parthians date their empire from 247 BCE, somewhat prior to 238. So the line of kings goes back to there. He establishes kingdom, killing Andragoras and he had successors. I'm just going down, so I just went down and kind of collected the list of kings because the information is fairly successful. There appears to have been somebody named Mithridates, and they're not sure, is listed in the histories. They're not sure he existed. I'm going to pronounce it Arsaces. No, I can't do this. Arsaces II was his son, I believe. Under Arsaces II, the Seleucids under Antiochus III invaded Parthia and established and forced it back into a status of a province. Arsaces II was allowed to continue ruling, but he had to swear fealty to the Seleucids. Hello? Was there a question there?
No, sorry. Carry on.
Okay. Next king was a guy named, this is a great Priapatius. If you know your Roman, I'm not sure whether that's Roman or Greek, but that's a really, really interesting name. He was probably a cousin of Arsaces II. He seems to have driven out the Seleucids. The Romans apparently defeated Antiochus III in Greece of all places. He's adopted the title of Basilius. Now, Basilius is sort of a Greek word for king, and it was widely, Alexander the Great billed himself as a Basilius. So it was what you did when you were a ruler. Periphetes, his eldest son, was a guy named Praetes. He conquered Hyrcania. He sees he sees a big chunk of the Seleucid Empire. There was a Mithridates in here as another son of Periphetes. He conquered big chunks of the Seleucid Empire, including Mesha captured Babylon, and he seems to have expanded east into India over here. This is all not well documented. There was an Praetes the second. Praetes the second was the son of Mithridates. When the Seleucids tried to recapture Mesopotamia, he defeated them. He then went over east and was killed in a fight with barbarians over on this side of his empire. There was an Artabanus, had obviously a very short reign. Had a very short reign, only a couple of years, and he was killed probably by the same barbarians. There was a Mithridates here, who finally defeated the barbarians, conquered Syria and Armenia, and at some point along the line, so the empire got a lot bigger. At some point along the line, he was dealing with the Romans and with the Chinese. So there was the Romans and the Chinese were one step away from each other. And this is circa 100. He reigned between 104 and 91 BCE. Gotarses was son of Mithridates. At this point, we're 91 to 87. The Parthians went through a dark age. We don't know much about them. The kings were obscure. But there was a Gotarses the first. There was an Orodes the first to AD 75. Again, we don't know. He may have been usurped by an uncle. The next guy was the uncle, Sinatraces, was probably about 80 years old when he seized power. So not surprising, he didn't last long. There was a Phraates III. Phraates was the son of Sinatraces. The kingdom was having problems by this time. They were the Armenians in Pontus were attacking them. And what happened there is he had two sons, Orodes and Mithridates, and they murdered him. Orodes II is the guy we're going to be interested in. Orodes II is the guy we're going to be interested in. Now we're going to go down and look at the Parthian military. The Parthians were nomadic barbarians. They had the composite bows. They raced around a horse. They had the composite bows. They used hit and run tactics and stuff like that. The Parthian, according to Plutarch, he didn't think the Parthians were as skilled as the Scythians at this stuff. But we can see it's not a Parthian guy, but it's from the same general period. He's demonstrating the Parthian shot, where you ride up to the enemy, you shoot an arrow at them, you then ride away from the enemy, you turn your saddle and shoot more arrows at them. Interestingly, Plutarch commented that running away from the enemy is not proper military and manly, but if you turn in the saddle and shoot an arrow at them, it's okay. I thought that was kind of fun. The other guy is called a Cataphract. He looks a lot like a medieval knight. He's wearing chainmail. He's wearing a helmet. The horse is armored. And in the reenactment, I think this is somebody in England doing this. It says the file name says something about the University of Oxford. They carried lances. So this is sort of the tactical concept that developed into European knighthood. Obviously, these guys were heavily armored, and they could be a terrifying thing to have charging you. Going through Wikipedia mentions the Parthians having infantry, but it sounds like they were conscripted and they weren't very good or important to anybody. So basically, a Parthian army contained a lot of cavalry, and these are the two main elements we're going to encounter. These are the two main elements we're going to encounter in the war. Rome. I used this one. I did the thing on Sulla. I used the same diagram for Sulla. We need to understand that Rome was in very bad shape. The Romans were not functioning as a team. They were fighting with each other. They were murdering most of the people in this diagram. Marius and Sulla died of old age. The Gracchi were murdered. Crassus died in battle. Pompey, Caesar, and Cicero were murdered. And Augustus basically shut down the Republic and lived a long life and died of old age, as we can see from the diagram here. The changes, I'm listing some of the things that happened here. There was a social war in which Italy revolted and demanded full Roman citizenship, and eventually the Romans kind of handed it over to them. There was warfare between Marius and Sulla involving all kinds of proscriptions. They're basically massacres. They seized Rome and killed everybody they didn't like. And since they hated each other's suppliers, just about everybody, they hated each other's supporters, just about everybody was in danger. And of course, Marius reorganized the Roman army. We moved from the legion of maniples into the legion of cohorts. I found a picture of a Roman triaris, which is what that appears to be a Roman triaris kit. Judging from the descriptions I found, that shield looks a little small to me, but I'm not sure this is well understood. And it looks to me like he's got a gladius. That helmet looks kind of cool. The reorganization of the Roman army was very important. The Roman army was the original Roman army was the citizens in arms, and you had to buy your own equipment, you had to procure your stuff. And having your Roman warrior kit was a prestige thing. You were an important, if you had that Triaris kit, it was, as I pointed out in the previous thing, it was like having a Cadillac in your driveway. It shows that you're superior to your neighbors and stuff like that. When the Roman was converted to a professional force, the legion of cohorts, the Romans you were serving alongside all kinds of common scum you wouldn't normally give the time of day to. So this must have had a huge effect on the Roman. It must have had a huge effect on just a social system around the Roman army. Another important point, of course, that the Roman soldiers were basically professionals. They were loyal to their generals rather than to the Roman state. I don't know what their voting status was. Look that up and start with that. On the old Roman army, you got to vote. If they hold a political discussion, all the people had military kit, put their military kit on, and they marched over to the plain of Mars, and that's where the discussion took place. And if you didn't have military kit, you stayed home and nobody cared what you thought. The professional army was quite different, and we don't know how the accounts I've got say they don't really know how a legion of maniples work tactically. The front it presents on a battlefield is quite short. You'd think somebody would flank them. So we don't know. And my references show very different diagrams of a legion of maniples versus a legion of cohorts. They're very different. And it couldn't have been instant. There must have been some kind of a transition during the period we're discussing. So we're not totally sure how everything worked. But it's an important consideration. Now we're looking at Crassus. Back up here. Crassus was from fairly well organized, was from fairly well-off families. The list all says Plutarch says his father would have been a censor, and apparently he led troops in the battle and been awarded a triumph, although we have no details. It turns out he was a quaestor in Spain as well, which will matter in a little bit. Plutarch then discusses what Crassus managed to do. He started his career with around 300 talents, and that's talents of silver. And I got a note down here about this. A talent is about 30 kilograms. That sounds to me like a hell of a lot of silver. As a consul, as he was getting ready to march over to Syria, he sacrificed a tenth of his goods to Heracles. He feasted people. He provided Romans from his own means enough to live on for 3 months. Having done that, he inventoried his property and found 7,100 talents of money. So the guy got very rich. He looked for the main chance. And it was not a quality that impressed the Romans. The quote here, I got the quote on the slide actually. The Romans, it is true, say that the many virtues of Crassus were obscured by the sole vice of avarice, and it is likely that the one vice which became stronger than all others weakened the rest. Crassus, he wasn't a drunk. He was polite. He was very, very nice to people. He was very nice to people. He wanted political power. He was prepared to. One of his enterprise, I'm trying to pin down like Marius. Sorry, in the Plutarch's account, this is at the start of the account. This goes to the history. At some point, Sulla had a fire department. So if your house is on fire, or the house next door to you was on fire, and it was obviously just going to burn down, Crassus would run up and buy your house, and he'd bring in slaves in, and they'd put the fire out or rebuild everything. He had architects and stuff like that as well. He had a good organization. So he owned a significant chunk of Roman property by the end of his career.
Howard, can I ask you a question regarding
Yeah.
the fire department? From
Yeah.
what I heard, it was such a rudimentary machines that instead of putting out the fires, because of the way the terms were created, there were fire hazards, right? Because people would get a heat from having inside fires, like on a fourth floor or something.
Well, the
Termas,
Roman, at some point along their line, the Romans were building apartment buildings. They were multi-story, and I think 4 to 6
yeah,
stories.
they were called termas. Yeah, termas. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the term you used again?
So they were saying that the fire department was basically, instead of extinguishing fire, was actually contributing because they didn't know that the water was the connector into exploding the fire further.
Well, by the sound of it, I think, but as these things catch fire, they burn down. And what you do is you seize control of the property, you build something new,
Right.
and then you own it. So, I mean, how do you get water up 6 stories in a building?
Right.
And the term is insulae. In a Roman insulae, the rich people lived on the bottom floor. Like nowadays, rich people live on the top floor because we have elevators. But back in the day, the rich people were on the bottom floor and the poor people lived on the top floors, and they had to climb up and down 6. If they needed water, they had to march down 6 floors, go to the pump, collect their water, and march back up. So you definitely wanted the bottom of these buildings. And usually the first story was stone and brick, but the upper ones were wood. And yeah, they burned easily. And because they were closely packed, they burned the ones next to them. So interesting.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Parthians and Seleucid, right? So
Yeah,
Seleucid Empire was pretty big, and I know you went in a little bit into it. But
I'm showing on my map here, I'm showing you this is 200 BC. We'll cover this. Basically, the Parthians conquered most of it.
Even the Bactrian, Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, or those remain?
I'm not sure what happened there. Like, they were having trouble with the barbarian invasions from the east. They were dealing with the Chinese.
Yeah, the famous 19th Legion, right? That meant Chinese, correct? I mean, that's a hearsay.
The accounts I've got are claiming that they were dealing directly with the Chinese. There are Chinese accounts of meeting Parthians.
Oh wow!
So I didn't really cover that one. Supposedly, Roman legionaries were captured at Carrhae, and these kind of were migrated across the continent, and they were encountered by Chinese.
I see.
And they think the Chinese were describing Roman troops. I didn't look into that one carefully.
That's fine. I mean,
there's not that many steps.
There was a very famous battle between the troops in China and Greco-Bactrian kingdom later on, and it's called Heavenly Horses War. That's where the dynasty, I don't remember what it was, the dynasty, I think it was Yuan dynasty, approached Greco-Bactrian kingdom, of course, Sogdianian horses, which were the top of the line horses, and that's how the Chinese troops were able to get better horses for them. Also, can you talk about the Parthian horsemanship, right? I mean, they were quite horsemen, right? You mentioned
Well, I did. I mentioned the cavalry. Basically, the Parthians probably originated from what's now southern Russia. They were part of that. They were part of that horse-mounted. They were part of that sort of horse-mounted cavalry tradition. Their bows are probably that bow there is, you can see it's recurved. It's presumably a composite bow of some sort. Interestingly, I don't know how. The problem with the bow and arrow is the power of a bow and arrow has nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with the archer. In engineering, we use the term strain energy. If I apply force to something, it deflects. The strain energy is the force I applied times the distance divided by 2. When you pull a bow, say you have a 40-pound bow, you pull a 40-pound bow, your average force is 20 pounds. If it's a regular, I think some of these fancy modern bows with the gears and everything are probably not, the pull is not linear, but on these things, that's how they work. In this sense, if you want a really powerful bow, what you need is a very big, strong archer. Mongo, the archer, he's got to be 6'6" and heavily muscled. Then he can take a large bow, pull it a long distance and apply a lot of force. So like in the late medieval period, the English had longbows, so they had 150 to 200 pound pull weights. In Plutarch's account, Plutarch notes that the Parthian arrows were really powerful. They smashed the armor and stuff like that. So it sounds like the Parthians had powerful bows, and that's kind of where if the guy's raised from childhood to be an archer, he's going to pull the bow line, he's going to build up those muscles. I didn't see any skeletal evidence of that. I would wonder, I was looking up Comanche archers, and what the Comanches were able to do is put a lot of arrows in the air very quickly. So like you dive out of the way the first arrow, and there's 2 or 3 others heading for you. So I think the pull weight of those is probably a lot lower, but of course, in the first half of the 19th century, nobody wore armor. So they didn't have to, they were trying to load muzzle-loading muskets, so they get, 1 or 2 shots off a minute. There was a lot of opportunity to go racing in and shoot these things at fairly close range. The Parthians had to deal with people that were wearing armor. It sounds like these bows were powerful, but I really couldn't find in that picture there. And again, this is not a Parthian. This was collected somewhere in sorry, what have I done there? Oops. My tag is wrong. This was collected somewhere in Parthia. Where are we here? This is described as a relief from the Hephthalite silver bowl and was found in the Swat district of Pakistan. And let's going to look this up on YouTube on thing here. They think it dates from 460 to 479 Christian era. So this is quite a bit later. So this was done quite a bit later than the Parthians. But it illustrates the concept.
Right. No, thank you for that. And Richard had done a presentation also on explaining the difference between Sassanids and Parthians. Obviously, those are the complete descendants of Armenian Empire or Armenian Iranic people, while the Parthians, as you explained, more come from the steppes of Russia.
Well, the Parthians are. It is an Iranian. I think it's described. The Parthians described as an Iranian. I mean, one of the things that's worth watching here is that the Parthians were Indo-European. The Parthians were Indo-Europeans like the Iranians. It was a similar language to the Iranians. I don't know how similar it is. Do they understand each other? I don't know. When the Parthians run into the Romans on the battlefield, what you're seeing is 2 groups of people that come out of that basic Indo-European warrior culture. Mark, you had a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. In regards to the Parthians and what we would call the Iranians, is it a similar difference between, say, the Turks and the Azerbaijanis and the Uzbeks? It's that they're in the kind of the same family of people.
Well, I think the Turks are Turkish is
Turkish versus Turkic.
The Turks. Okay, the Turks were not Indo-European.
No, okay. No. No, I'm just saying that it's an analogy. Is the difference between Parthians and Iranians analogous to Turks and Uzbeks? They're part of the same family.
So maybe you mean Mark, Turkic versus Turks, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know how that works. For starters, what's happening? The Persians. The various people that came into Persia were basically mounted cavalry, and they had composite bows, and they did Parthian shots and the whole bit. And then they invaded Persia. And they settled down, became civilized. They learned to read and write. They learned to put up buildings and stuff like that, and kind of moved away from the original cavalry culture to some extent. And you see that in Persia. These invasions, I would assume that the average person living in what's now Turkey is descended from people that lived there like 5,000 years ago. There's been no racial change. There's been a language change as the barbarians invade and establish new ruling classes.
God, I was itching so.
In a sense, there probably weren't all that many Parthians out there running around. They were a small ruling class, and everybody else that wasn't Parthian did what they were told. was a lovely thing. I was reading a history of the Muslims in Spain, and there was some, I think I forget what the last big Muslim victory called, but somebody wrote a poem about how he did it the old way and it was glorious and that's how it should be done. So there was an understanding at some point you're several generations from the original barbarians, but you see them as mighty and heroic and virtuous and stuff like that. So I would guess the Persians did that. I would guess the Parthians did that. And probably the Turks did that. I'm not sure about the relationship between the Turks and the Ottomans.
Ottomans are Turks.
Yeah.
It's
But
Turkey.
they're not the original Seljuk Turks.
No, they're not.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I have a question regarding the triumvirate. Are you going to address? I just wanted to kind of like understand that it's such a complex, and Crassus being the intermediary between the Pompey and Caesar. So
I'm gonna get to that.
Okay, good.
I wasn't going to a lot of detail, but I am headed there. We are headed there. Right now we're covering Parthians, so basically we're back to this slide here. We're looking at Rome circa 50 BC, which is roughly when Carrhae happened. The Roman Republic is going downhill, and we can see in retrospect that it was dead meat. I think I covered everything. I think I covered everything on this guy. I think that was it. Yeah. I note that the vast majority of people in this diagram were murdered. That's an important point about Roman politics. Now we get to Crassus, and we're covering Crassus. Crassus was during the Roman civil wars and proscriptions. Crassus was on Sulla's side, not Marius. So Marius had Crassus's father and his brother executed. Crassus himself fled to Spain and apparently hid out in a cave or something like that. His father, people had fond memories of his father, apparently. At some point, it became, I guess, Sulla returned to Italy and started taking ground, and Crassus was able to emerge from hiding and come back to Italy, where he joined Sulla's forces. He was able to raise troops. I don't know if he was wealthy yet. He was able to raise troops. He distinguished himself as a commander under Sulla to some extent. He was known to be greedy, apparently sacked a couple of cities and pillaged the place. There was a lovely incident where he was asked to go raise a force among the Marsi. He requested an escort, and Sulla replied, "I give thee as an escort thy father, thy brother, thy friends, and thy kinsmen, who were illegally and unjustly put to death, and whose murderers I am pursuing." So Crassus was an effective military commander, but people were suspicious of his motives. He was clearly financially greedy. I guess Sulla died. Rome kind of sorted out. Crassus' relationship with Pompey was a little complicated. I've got Pompey shown here. And since they don't do nude statues of political leaders anymore. Basically, there was kind of a rivalry between Crassus and Pompey. Pompey was a pretty good military commander. He struck while young. I haven't read up enough as much as I should have. He was already being known as Magnus. Sulla had a high opinion of Pompey. Apparently, would rise his approach, uncover his head, and acknowledge him as imperator. And that video clip of the decimation, Crassus calls himself an imperator. I don't think he was able to. He would do that in Syria, and Plutarch judges that to an inappropriate conduct. He hadn't earned the title, so I don't think he'd call himself an imperator. Crassus was a better politician than Pompey. Apparently, he curried favor with people in Rome and stuff like that. So he was politically important. The Third Servile War. I'm not going into too much detail. I think we're doing a whole presentation on the Servile Wars. But basically, a bunch of gladiators escaped their ludus Spartacus took command. They were able to defeat some other soldiers. They were joined by more slaves. Plutarch goes to a lot of detail describing what a noble character Spartacus was. Remember, they didn't write melodrama in those days. So Spartacus destroyed a couple of armies, but eventually Spartacus took charge of the troops and put the rebellion down. He did this as quickly as he could because he wanted to take credit for doing this, and he didn't. When Pompey got there, he actually did request help from Pompey, and Pompey did clean up a couple of it right at the end there. But these guys were competing with each other. At this point, Julius Caesar returned to Rome. They knew each other. On one of the accounts I've got here, these guys knew each other. Caesar more or less reconciled Pompey and Crassus, and they became the Triumvirate, and they basically set to work ruling Rome. They shared consulships. They were supported Caesar's Gallic campaigns, and at various times, Crassus and Pompey were elected consuls in Rome. So the three were more or less in control of Rome. The Triumvirate was just a term. I don't think it was a formal political concept. It was just there were three guys and they got along and they looked after each other's interests. Significant point here is that Pompey and Caesar were both war heroes. Pompey won a number of important actions. I think Caesar may have been famous to some extent, pulled the Winston Churchill trick of writing the histories of his wars. And Crassus was not a famous warrior. He was very conscious of that, and this would probably affect his conduct as time went by. Scrolling down here, Syria. We've done a presentation on the Mithridatic Wars. There was a lot of activities. The first Mithridatic War was fought actually in Greece and Macedonia. So I think the key battles in this area here, but Mithridates from Pontus was sending troops across. The Romans eventually got in here and conquered the place. In 64 BC, Pompey deposed and executed Antiochus the 13th, the last Seleucid king. So this is the Seleucid Empire. This became a Roman province. I think most of and you can see the Parthians. I don't have a date. I forgot to check the date on this map. We can see the Parthian Empire has expanded itself quite a bit. The Parthians conquered a big chunk of the Seleucids, obviously, and we can see the other ones in there. We can see Armenia, we can see Pontus. There was all kinds of stuff going on in here. I also note that not in Syria, Caesar is over in Europe here, conquering Gauls. So from Crassus' point of view, he needs a fun, glorious war. We really need to get him a fun, glorious war here. So we go on there. Next, Carrhae. This is my last slide. This is my last slide. We need a fun, glorious war. What happened here is that as I pointed out earlier, the Orodes II and Mithridates IV had murdered their father, King Phraates III. They then fell out and started fighting each other. Orodes won, Mithridates fled to the Roman province of Syria, and the Romans saw an opportunity to send troops back and put a puppet ruler in the form of Parthia and control Parthia. They didn't do this. There was all kinds of stuff going on in, they were dealing with the Ptolemies in Egypt, so there was a big opportunity. Oh, am I here? Did I do something wrong? Oops, my slides are not working. This is a much richer place than that place. Controlling Egypt was vitally important in the ancient world, so they didn't do anything. Mithridates organized an army. He invaded Parthia. And Orodes' general Surena besieged him, defeated him, and killed him. The next thing that happened is that Orodes invaded Armenia. Armenia was a Roman ally. Armenia is right there. Armenia was it was nominally a Roman ally, but they weren't a very solid Roman ally. And it appears that the Armenians were willing to deal with the Parthians. Things were messy, but this was Crassus' job was to cross over, march into Asia Minor, march into what was then Anatolia, and do something with the Parthians. and he took on the job. He was enthusiastic about it. The other historians note that Caesar, it all made sense to Julius Caesar, who was in Gaul. It didn't affect his campaigns or anything like that. And we're going to go to my Plutarch. There was a conversation with the Crassus landed with an army. He marched in here. He marched into Mesopotamia and occupied a number of cities. One of the cities he sacked it. And killed a bunch of people, and his troops proclaimed him imperator. And accounts appear to note that that wasn't a big enough victory for somebody to be proclaimed imperator. And he really shouldn't have accepted the title, but he did. He wanted the prestige. He then settled in and wintered his army, and he waited for his son. His son's name is, where am I? In the wrong place, for one thing. He waited for his son Publius to come from Gaul. Publius had distinguished himself. He had a couple thousand Gallic cavalry. These people came over and joined Crassus's army. Plutarch notes that this gave the Parthians time to organize their army and get ready to resist the Romans. If they'd moved faster, they might have succeeded. As the battle approached, the next thing that Crassus did is, okay, the Parthians sent envoys. According to the envoys approached Crassus, and they said, basically, if your army's been sent up by the Roman people, it means war without truce and without treaty. But if it's against the wishes of the country as they were formed and for his own private gain, Crassus basically was saying, if this is wars being fought for Crassus' private gain, then the Parthians will act with moderation, take pity on Crassus' old age. Crassus was 62, and they released the Romans, the men he had under watch and ward rather than watch. The Parthians said they'd limit their war, and Crassus rejected it. I think the line was, probably works better in the original Latin. It was something about, where's this thing? Find it quickly. I think he'd deal with them in the Seleucid Empire, and the Parthians told him it wasn't happening. Crassus now got ready to invade. At this point, he was dealing with some Arabs, or where are we here? Where's my guy here? My nose. He was dealing with an Arab king. The Arab king had helped up Pompey a few years earlier. Modern accounts are speculating the Parthians bribed him. So he gave Crassus poor directions, and Crassus marched his troops out into the desert. And this sort of the gist is probably doesn't date back to the Parthians, but it gives you an idea what the general area looks like. He marched away from supply trains. He had wagons and stuff like that, water and stuff, but they were out in the middle of a desert, and there was no water and no supplies, and it was not a good thing. There was nothing. Where are we here? The plains, yeah. There's some difficulties off the men, whatever brigades filled them with obstinate objections. Yeah. They weren't in good shape. Eventually, they encountered the Parthian army. The Parthians, not led by King Artavasdes, was in Armenia. The army was commanded by a guy named Surena. Everything you read about these guys comes from Plutarch. Surena was described as not an ordinary man at all, but in wealth, birth, and consideration, he stood next to the king, while in valor and ability, he was the foremost Parthian of his time, besides having no equal in stature and personal beauty. Apparently, it says here, and again, this is coming from Plutarch, not from a Parthian source, he traveled with a baggage train of 1,000 camels, 200 wagons for his concubines, 1,000 mail-clad horsemen, plus a larger force of lightly armed cavalry. Between horsemen, vassals, and slaves, he had more than 10,000 men. He held the hereditary privilege of setting the crown on the head of the Parthian king, including the present king of Herodes. I was reading the Parentheir translation. It was spelled Hyrodes, Hyrodes, but they're the same guy. When they captured the city of Seleucia, he was the first guy to mount the walls, and he was not yet 30 years of age. And this is what the Romans were up against. Down to Carrhae. Now we're going to see back on my Plutarch. When they finally encountered the Parthian army, the Surena had his cavalry cover themselves in skins and stuff like that, so they didn't look scary. So the Romans were seeing relatively weak troops. It was noted that the Armenians were the people the Romans were fighting in the middle weren't particularly good warriors. The Romans were pretty contemptuous of them. They were hearing scary stories about the Parthians. They hadn't seen anything. They hadn't seen anything yet. Surena presented an army that looked kind of scruffy and not very disciplined. As the Romans were approaching. As the Romans approached a river, the Parthians threw their stuff off and started beating kettle drums and stuff like that. And the Romans suddenly saw a large force of heavily armored warriors. Remember, some of the guys they had lots of light cavalry, but the Cataphract were heavy cavalry. They wore full suits of armor. That would have been a fairly intimidating sight. Yeah, no, it's according to Plutarch.
Howard, I read somewhere that Parthian soldiers, especially the heavy infantry, were, almost put like covering on, not to show that they're heavy infantry, because they didn't want Romans to think that they were knights.
I don't think the Parthians had anything that could be called heavy. From what I can tell, the main Parthian forces were cavalry. They were either heavy cavalry or light cavalry. As far as I can see, I'm seeing references to conscripts. So you just kind of heard some peasants and give them pointy sticks, and they can guard something or provide a distraction to the enemy while your cavalry go maneuvering. So at the point, at the point where they pulled their disguises off, what the Romans were looking at was heavy cavalry. And as we look at that picture of the Cataphract, I don't know. I'm assuming somebody did some research, like everything there was armored. Now, I don't know what it'd be like riding around like this in the Middle East. When the Crusaders did it, they what they call it, put a hauberk, and it wasn't a hauberk. They pulled some kind of a white linen thing over top to try to cool themselves down. That maybe they were hardy. I don't know. Maybe they were hardy. It says here the Parthians wore their hair long and bunched in their foreheads to make themselves look familiar. The first thing the Parthians did was they charged the Roman. They considered charging the Roman formation, but the Romans were packed up and disciplined, so they started off sending in the light cavalry, and this is where they ran into the Carthaginian cavalry. According to Plutarch, the arrows were powerful. So I was under the impression a lot of these light cavalry at the compound bows, the bows aren't that powerful. If I got a guy marching up with a spear, I can, ride within 50 feet of him and shoot an arrow at him and ride away quite safely. I'd like the way Plutarch puts this. At once, the plight of the Romans was a grievous one, for if they kept their ranks, they were wounded in great numbers, and if they tried to come to close quarters with the enemy, they were just as far from effecting anything and suffered just as much. For the Parthians shot as they fled, and next to the Scythians, they do this most effectively. And I like this part. And it is a very clever thing to seek safety while still fighting, and to take away the shame of flight. So if they ride away without shooting arrows, it would be shameful, but if they're shooting arrows, it's okay. I really like that. The Romans were hoping the barbarians would run out of arrows. The Romans kind of advanced and hoped the Parthians would run out of arrows, but they didn't. The Parthians had brought up supplies. They had camels laden with arrows, and the Parthians could go back and get more of it. At this point, they described the Roman formation. I think I've never seen diagrams or anything like that, and I never believed them anyway. Crassus is in the center. His son, what's his son's name again? His son Publius was commanding troops off on one of the flanks. He instructed Publius to go and attack the Parthians. They attempted to do this, but again, the Parthians just shot them full of arrows. Publius had 1,300 horsemen, about 500 archers, 8 cohorts of men at arms, and he charged. This failed completely. The Parthians shot them to bits and killed them. Publius died bravely, but Publius was killed. Most of the troops were killed. the Parthians, he impressed the Parthians with his courage, but they chopped his head off, stuck it at the end of a spear, and rode up. And where are we going? What am I looking at here? Whatever. Actually, I'll get to that in a minute. The next thing that happened, by the sound of it, is that the Parthians sent their heavy cavalry to charge. I don't know how long. This is what I wonder about the Roman legion cohorts. Nobody's got long spears. It's not like you're charging a Macedonian phalanx. If you're carrying short spears or javelins, the cavalry guys carrying long lances can kill you without coming in range of your own weapons. The British had this problem at the battle during the Napoleonic Wars. The British had this problem with Polish lances at the Battle of Albuera. The Poles didn't have to come in bayonet range. Normally, if you want to saber British infantry, you have to get past their bayonets. So it sounds like the heavy cavalry, the Cataphract, the heavy cavalry were very effective. Things deteriorated. Things continued to deteriorate. At some point, Crassus was told that his son was killed. He set to work retreating. He says, what is it? Crassus actually shows some decent leadership qualities at this point. He was going up and down the line. He's saying, "Mine, O Romans, is this sorrow, and mine alone, but the great fortune and glory of Rome abide unbroken and conquered in you who are alive and safe. Now, if you have any pity for me, thus bereft of the noblest of sons, show it by your wrath against the enemy, rob them of their joy, avenge their cruelty, and be not cast down at what happened, for it must needs be that those who aim at great deeds should also suffer greatly." It was not without bloody losses. Even Lucullus overthrew Tigranes or Scipio Antiochus, and our fathers of old lost 1,000 ships off Sicily. And in Italy, many imperators and generals, not one of whom by this defeat prevented them from afterwards mastering as conquerors. For it is not by good fortune merely that the Roman state reached its present plenitude of power, but by the patient endurance and valor of those who faced dangers on its behalf. This didn't go over. His men were becoming demoralized. Parthians bivouac nearby. Where am I looking for that? At some point, the Parthians rode up with Publius' head, and the question was, and I'm looking for the quote here, and they proclaimed that he was clearly from a noble, brave family, and they didn't think much of it, and they didn't think much of his dad. I can't see it here. Some of the Romans managed to escape at this point. Some of the Romans managed to escape. The Surena Parthians came forward and offered to negotiate with the Romans. And while doing this, they captured Crassus. And at some point, somebody killed him. One of the Parthians chopped his head off, I believe. Most of the Romans were killed or forced to surrender. And that was basically it. Surena won the battle. Very few Romans got away. Surena brought Crassus' head to King Artavasdes. There was a crazy incident. There was some kind of a Greek play, and the actor picked up, sort of made a little performance with Crassus' head. I've heard that he poured molten metal down his throat. I'm seeing no sign of that I've seen no sign of that in Plutarch's accounts. And that was basically it. Now, the interesting thing afterward is that the Parthians, Artavasdes died of old age, which is not bad for that period of time. He actually stepped down. I'm going down to my notes here. He actually, as he got older, he stepped down and had his son take over from him. As the Romans continued fighting in the Middle East, the Parthians actually took sides. The Parthians would actually take sides with they invaded as the Romans fought civil wars and fought Egypt and stuff like that. The Parthians kind of played one Roman thing off against the other. The Parthian Empire lasted quite a long time. I think it was eventually destroyed by the Emperor Septimus Severus, or at least Cataphract was sacked quite brutally back in about 250, about around 210 AD. And that's basically it.
Howard, you might have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I forgive me if you'd covered it, this topic. I had to step away. I'm just kind of astounded when you showed the map of the Roman conquests, territory at that time. It seems like Crassus really went out of his way to go to seek this battle. And why go that far instead of somewhere closer that would be more consolidatable, so to speak?
Well, I think what the Romans tended to do, if they didn't conquer something outright, they set the king up as a client. So I think the Roman perception was that the king of Armenia was a client. I think they defeated Pontus, so they controlled most of this area.
Through kind of like a mafia.
They controlled the area. There was no real opportunity for a war in this area. I like using the term fun and glorious warfare. We sit back today and think, oh, war is bad and horrible. But for a lot of these were warrior culture. And the Romans and the Parthians were probably way more similar than we realize. They were warrior cultures. And you wanted glory in the battlefield. And Caesar was winning glory over in Gaul. There was nothing to do in Africa. There was no opportunity there. Your opportunity to conquer something was if you wanted to fight a war, you had to go here and fight it. Actually, the Battle of Carrhae was around there somewhere.
Okay, so this was concurrent to Caesar's conquest of Gaul.
Yeah, I mean, part of Crassus's problem is that he, as part of that triumvirate, Caesar and Pompey were genuine war heroes, and Crassus wasn't.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And if you don't mind, just a quick comment: the photo that you had of those mud brick houses,
the
domes. I've actually been in them in Haran, and as a note, they are, in terms of Fahrenheit, a good 10 degrees cooler than the outside temperature, because the conical part is to help the hot air rise and pull in cool air from the bottom, and the hot air would go through through an open point on the roof. So it's quite clever.
Okay, they're not. No, I don't think they date back to the Parthian time, but that makes sense. Those walls are probably really thick, so the insulate pretty well. Probably have good heat capacity.
Yeah, I don't know. They told me at the time that it was the longest inhabited city in the world. And Chinese might have something else to say about that, but I don't know.
Haran, it's hard to know. I don't know if China can do that. That's Haran. Do you think Haran is the oldest occupied city in the world?
And that's what they said. That's what they said there.
Okay, cool. I thought Damascus was extremely old.
Oh yeah, everything's old there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for putting this together, Howard.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Again, I can't really pin down the Roman military system is really hard to pin down. I'm assuming the Romans were marching in close formation with spears. Yeah.
Howard, I have a question.
Yeah.
So first, why didn't the Crassus take advantage of the Armenian affiliate state and went the other way around? Was he afraid of a betrayal? That's one question. Another question, why didn't Caesar and Pompey try to intervene and help out in any kind of fashion or form? Or this triumvirate was kind of independent of each other? They all functioned independently, because we know that Caesar married Pompey. Pompey married Caesar's daughter. I don't know if that was at that time, but they obviously got a falling out after she ended up dying, and he blamed Pompey for it.
Yeah.
And Pompey was in love with it and stuff like that. But in here, Crassus was an intermediary between those two hotheads. Nobody.
Yeah. Well, from what I can tell, for starters, one of the accounts I'm looking at says that Caesar knew that Pompey said it for Parthia, but he thought that was a good idea. Going through Plutarch, the Romans were contemptuous of the Armenians as soldiers. One of the things that may have got them in trouble is that the people of Pontus and Armenia and stuff like that were beneath contempt. And so they figured the Parthians were stupid and useless too. That may have been one of the things that got them in trouble. The key to what I call fun and glorious warfare is you win the battle, you go to war, there's not too much danger, you win the battle, you wildly exaggerate the danger and the gloriousness when you describe it afterward. And it really sucks when it turns out the people are really nasty fighters and they kill you and it gets too glorious. Second thing is that Caesar, one of the things I kind of wonder about is these Romans had a slave economy. They figured that Caesar captured something over 1 million slaves while campaigning in Gaul. So in a sense, if you're running a slave economy, the Romans did, and they weren't reproducing, the slaves weren't reproducing themselves, you have to invade somebody and conquer them. And I don't know how the Romans had communicated a bit with the Parthians. I don't know how much they knew about them. I don't think the Romans had ever seen anything. The Cataphracts weren't that recent. They'd been around for several hundred years before the Romans ran into it. But I don't think Romans ran into cavalry like that. I'm kind of wondering, a Roman legionary with a pair of pilum would be really vulnerable to horse archers, and they'd be pretty bad shape if they get charged by a cataphract with a long enough lance. And of course, they fought the battle precisely where the enemy wanted to fight it. But it did a lot of stuff wrong. And I know Plutarch points out that Crassus spent too much time launching his invasion. He marched into Syria. He was clearly going to invade the place. He then sat down in winter quarters. And this is time the Parthians had to get ready. We read a lot of stuff about ancient warfare. King Bob raises an army and attacks King Fred and defeats him. And then the next year, King Fred raises an army, goes and attacks King Bob, whose army is disbanded, and he defeats King Bob. There was a lot of that going around. There was a lot of that going around at this time. There wasn't a systematic, outside the Romans, there wasn't a systematic military system in place. So Crassus gave the Parthians time to assemble their troops. Another problem with Armenia is that Armenia was nominally a Roman ally, but when King Herodes invaded the place, the Armenians said, we actually kind of like you. So when Surena transported Crassus' head, he actually transported to Armenia and met King Herodes and the Armenian king. And it's going back and looking at that map, Armenia may have been a long way. Where's that map? I fixed my thing. Armenia's a long. You're Greece. You land here. You march that way. Maybe you take a boat to get to here, and then there's Parthia. Armenia is up there somewhere. You have to get to Armenia. They went that way. Armenia's this way. It's a much longer march, and you're a much longer way from Rome if anything goes wrong. Pretty cool. I can see their thinking. Plutarch's pretty clear. The Romans were contemptuous of most of the soldiers that operate in this area.
You guys want to mute yourself and ask Howard a question regarding the Parthians, Romans, or anything regarding this time period?
Hi, yes, my name is Daniel. Apologies for the sound interruption earlier. Regarding the aftermath of the battle, so decisive Roman defeat, most of the army destroyed. And then in terms of history, I know that Augustus, or Octavian as he would have been called, close to the time, went on to sort of make a deal to have the standards retrieved. But in terms of the immediate aftermath of the destruction of the Roman army, were the Parthians invading Roman territory? Yeah, what was the more medium-term aftermath of the disaster?
Well, for starters, a decisive defeat is when the country is defeated and completely destroyed. It winds up being destroyed. Now, obviously, it wasn't a decisive defeat; it was defeat. And Romans suffered lots of military disasters. Roman armies marched into the bed. The problem with the Romans was they just sent more troops and tried again, and they kept trying. Now, in the case of the Parthians, they were distracted. The Romans were fighting a civil. The Caesar and Pompey stopped getting along. A new person coming. It was a little late. Caesar and Pompey stopped getting along, and the Romans fought a series of civil wars. The really important thing to control in the ancient world was Egypt. Egypt grew wheat. They shipped the wheat to Rome. Rome basically lived on Egyptian and North African wheat. So these are the places that mattered. This place was not nearly as important to them. So there wasn't a whole lot of pressure. The Parthians, we tend to proclaim our enemies as evil. I think one of the things about reading Roman accounts and stuff like this, and reading guys like Plutarch, Plutarch's not quite back me up on this, but if you read guys like Tacitus and stuff, they don't demonize the enemy. Wars, basically conflicts happen, shit happens, we kill each other, and something else happens later. So the Parthians are playing Roman factions off against each other. Eventually, I didn't read up on this, but eventually Augustus, this guy negotiated with the Parthians to get his Roman standards back and some of his legionaries. So there was a kind of a friendly conversation going on. I would guess a really important thing is it wasn't really important to capture Parthia. It was important to capture the guy that captured Egypt captured vast amounts of wealth. And he controlled whether Rome got bread or not.
We have Howard. We have a question on the chat.
Yep.
Can I read it?
Okay. Let me stop sharing here.
Oh, okay. So, Stephen, would you like to ask that question, or you want me to read it? All right. So during the Spartacus War, about 15 years before Carrhae, were Caesar and Cato Jr. officers under Crassus? Could they perhaps have met then, or also known Cicero, who I believe was then an officer in Sicily, official in Sicily, sorry. So it's a two-stated question. They're asking about Cato Jr., who was the officer under Crassus, and Cicero, who was the official in Sicily. Go ahead.
I didn't see any mention of either of those two guys. I think Julius Caesar was off doing something else. There was a mention in one of the accounts about Caesar being captured by, Caesar was famously captured by pirates. And he happily did presentations on stuff, and he assured them, and when he was freed, he was going to come back and hunt them down and kill them all. And they should have believed him. But he remarked that there was some remark to the effect that Cash is going to love every minute. That Crassus is going to love every minute of this. I don't, Caesar and where's my accounting? Where's my map? Need my map. Where is it? I have to look at my map again. I'm just looking at my map here. My notes here. Rome, 50 BC. Caesar was the same age as Crassus. He was he's maybe 5-10 years younger. They were part of the same generation, so Caesar was in command of troops. I think he was a little older. Pompey was young. Pompey was younger. Was also younger than Pompey was about the same age as Crassus as well. The Plutarch seems to imply he's not, but my chart says he is. So. I don't see any. I don't see that.
Right.
It might have happened. Yeah.
There's another question on the chat. From the battle, there was 1,000 slaves that were taken over and sent and may have been sent to China. Have you heard any of that stuff from this?
I didn't see. I don't see any accounts of that. Remember, as I'm reading Plutarch here, and when I go into Wikipedia and all the other sources, it's obvious they're reading Plutarch as well. Plutarch knew diddly squat about China. Supposedly, Roman soldiers Roman soldiers were, and some Roman legionaries were recruited and marched over to China. Remember, these were professional soldiers, so here's money, come and fight for me. So it might not have been that difficult to get them to march over to a place like that. So it sounds like some of these guys encountered. So it sounds like it appears that some Roman legionaries wound up in China. And there are Chinese accounts of things that sound a lot like Roman legionaries. Now, what I don't know is how important slavery was to the Parthians. See, if the Romans conquer your country, the Romans enslave everybody and drag them back, and you clear mines and fight in the arena as gladiators and all the other stuff the Romans like to do. I'm not sure what when the Parthians controlled the old Sassanid Empire, they control Mesopotamia, and there's a whole bunch of guys farming, and they're just peasants, and they're peasants, and they're probably not perceived as slaves. What would you do with slaves if you were a Parthian? So I don't, was there a slave trade were the Parthians running a slave trade from Rome to China? I would say almost certain. We have no information, but I would say almost certainly not.
Luckily enough, we're actually doing a first century China history tonight at 7. So we will raise that question.
That might be worth it. This one's tricky. I've been reading up I've got a really good book on the development of writing. And basically they found oracle bones, which date back to the Shang dynasty, sometime of 1000 BC. And it's a system of writing. It's up and working. It's clearly well sorted out. But that's all they've got. So it sounds like the Chinese were writing on some kind of perishable media, and it's all perished. So we don't know how far back Chinese civilization goes. We can see constructions where it's clearly some kind of a Neolithic civilization. We don't know when they started writing or when they started an advanced civilization. Are you doing first century BC or first century AD?
BCE, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have to stick around for that. That'll be interesting. Well, we don't know what shape it was in, but for that matter, were the Chinese into slavery?
Of course. Qing dynasty was famous for that. But the reason we're not seeing a lot of the, continuation in Chinese history, and again, we're swaying away from subject, and on a side note, is because during the time of the, Qing dynasty, the first emperor, the one that responsible for terracotta soldiers, had destroyed over books and killed a lot of the scholars of the prior dynasties. So that's why we don't know anything. And then he also united the country and presented his own philosophy. Almost, he was a totalitarian leader at the time. So,
yeah. Now, wasn't the movie A Crouching Tiger, Hidden a Dragon? Wasn't that about him?
It was, correct.
Yeah, I was watching one of those movies and I was thinking, damn it, this is Chinese propaganda.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think, like, the point was the Roman economy was based on slavery. The Romans more or less ran the small landholders off their property and replaced them with slave plantations. Their mining was done by slaves. There's just a perception that all kinds of jobs could not be performed by a noble Roman. They had to be performed by slaves. And I don't know if that mindset occurs elsewhere. If you're a Parthian, you're riding around on a horse all the time. Can you manage slaves?
Yeah. Any other questions anybody has? Or just, unmute yourself and ask Howard.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess that's
okay. Yeah.
that. Oh, by the way, so we just wanted to update. Howard, would you like to talk about next week? What presentation?
We were talking about that. We need to talk about what we're going to do there. I did a presentation. We're talking about, so you're going to do Spartacus. I did a presentation on gladiators a few months ago, and I've got that. So I was going to help out with Spartacus. we got to talk about how we're going to do that. How we're going to
So
split that
yeah,
up.
I want your presentation on the gladiators. That's going to be part of it. One thing that we gotta collaborate on is
Mhm.
another, Thracians, right? Like, what was there a nation? Talking about their Kabbalists and where is it? Where are they from? What? Why was he considered? Was he considered Thracian? There was a lot of aspects of him as unknown. People thought he was Gaul. People thought he was Thracian, and people thought he never existed.
Gauls are people from Gaul, and Thracians are people from Thrace. But Gauls are a type of gladiator, as are Thracians.
Right.
As are Thracians. So hard to tell about that. I was actually interested in reading through Plutarch. Describes Spartacus in very positive terms. He clearly have noble sensibilities. He clearly was of noble sensibilities and stuff like that.
So what my point? Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's interesting to see how Plutarch handled that. And again, I think you kind of have to step away. We tend to tell stories as melodrama, and I don't think the Romans did. That's an important point. Now, the other thing in my preamble to my presentations on gladiators, I emphasized that we have a lot of knowledge of gladiator combat in the 1st century AD, and we have a lot less of it as we move away from the 1st century AD, and that includes BC. I personally suspect that a huge transition took place when the Republic collapsed and got replaced by the Principate. If I'm going to regularly get together and slaughter slaves in an arena, I need expendable slaves. I need cheap expendable slaves. So if Caesar marches into Gaul and drags back 1 million slaves, they're cheap and expendable. I can slaughter them, and everybody has, except the slaves, everybody else has fun. When we moved into the Principate, and again, we'll come back and look at Crassus. Crassus needed a fun, glorious war to establish his reputation, to establish his reputation as a powerful Roman. Now, that's fine in the late Republic. That's how the Republic worked. You cover yourself in glory. You're credible. You have a force of loyal soldiers who will kill anybody that disagrees with you. Those are all important things in the Republic. When we get into the Empire under Augustus, you're best off killing these people as quickly as you can. And so they weren't waging as much aggressive warfare. The slaves were not pouring into Rome at the rate they did during the Republic. And what that meant is that the gladiators now becoming expensive. And remember, a Roman gladiator was, obviously, in a sense, a Roman gladiator was you had to have a baby, raise the guy up, feed him, raise him, train him, and get him up in his 20s. And the Roman gladiators were expected to be big, impressive guys. They were expected to be big and impressive. It was sort of they symbolized Roman manliness. So there was no such thing as cheap gladiators.
Yeah, but
so
maybe for
Spartacus. Yeah, so Spartacus puts us in that problematic period when gladiators were fairly cheap, and gladiator combat could be quite bloody. It sounds like they were doing the gladiator stuff where you had Thracians and Gauls and Samnites and stuff like that.
But also you have to, obviously there were a lot of the Thracian and Gaulish tribes were part of the Roman front lines and were privy to Roman tactics. So therefore, even they were not fully gladiators, they could have been living in what is it called? And under the dominos, right? Or dominion, and they could have been just training partners. I don't know what the I know that the gladiatorship was almost like a factory, right? They had a pharmacy, they had a hospital inside the Colosseum and other gladiator schools. So it's interesting that it was just like a football team, with yeah.
But I wonder about that one. If it's say 50 BC and I want to stage gladiatorial games, I've got a whole bunch of Gauls, and Gaul is not a united place. They all fought with each other. So I'd have no trouble getting 2 Gauls into the arena. They would agree to kill each other in combat. The logistics, that's sort of how the logistics worked in 50 BC. In 50 AD, they don't work that way.
All right. Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mostly research, you know, about the character of Spartacus. Obviously, as him being, you know, a prima gladiator. You know, I don't know how true it is, and that was in what, Pompeii, right? You know, so a lot of the character may be just made up, you know, so to speak. And
I'm okay. Definitely read Plutarch's account. Definitely read Plutarch's article on Crassus. He goes into some detail about Spartacus' character.
Plutarch to me is sketchy, you know, in a lot of cases. You know, he's like a Herodotus sometimes, you know. So you know, if there is any, any other ones I can,
I didn't go looking for that. Because Aaron would cover that pretty. You can look at that one as well. That one's interesting. My comment was that there really is no literature on gladiator combat. There's usually all the literature on gladiator combat is somebody writing about something else. They weren't really interested. It's like, you know, where's a book by Margaret Atwood on professional wrestling?
Right. Oh, you're right.
Yeah. So it's, it's tricky. So I don't know how dangerous it was back in the time. Now, another issue here is that, again, the Gauls, the Romans, the Parthians and stuff were all part of an Indo-European warrior culture. They were way more similar to each other than we totally understand. And there was this sort of acceptance of your fate. If your fate is to die in the arena, then you're going to die in the arena, and you keep your chin up and do it bravely.
Right.
And that may have helped the Roman stage the game. You'd have a hard time doing that with people nowadays.
Except when you got the gladius, right, to free yourself. That's what was rarely done, and only was given by emperor, right?
Well, we don't know. Yeah, I was looking up casualties. They were somewhat higher than I thought. I still suspect there was some cheating going on. If the gladiator's wearing a mask and you can't see his face, then you can be in the arena, watch somebody slit his throat, and you wouldn't realize that's the same guy when you meet him in a bar or in a supermarket, you know, a week later.
I see.
And let's face it, if you're a gladiator and your owner is cheating like this, you're gonna cooperate.
Exactly. All right, my friend Howard. So let's schedule some for Thursday, and let's hash it out. You know, and then you know, I will send you the invite. But today's presentation was excellent as always. Thanks for leaving time for questions. Thanks for leaving time for questions. You know, and just to reiterate, tonight at 7, we have a 1st century BCE history and philosophy and writing. And then this Thursday, we're going to talk about the Armenian genocide and kind of switching gears, and Ottoman Empire or Ataturk, or Young Turks. And then on Saturday, we will talk about Spartacus, you know, and then on Sunday, we have Latin language in ancient Rome. I think, this is going to be 3 or 4 presentations coming up. Thank you. I hope everybody has a nice day. Howard, again, excellent presentation. Thank you. And then we'll talk Thursday. Thank you.
Okay.